Who do you see your peers as?
It can go from Alexander Wang to Isabel Marant to Acne in some ways.
Do you feel competitive with those brands though?
Not really. I mean, we don't look at them like, oh, you know.
Yeah. That's why that question is always it gives us like a little, like, we're like, who's our competitor? And we're just naming people that we usually sit across or sit next to in retail shops, but yeah, we don't really see the competition.
I mean, the timing of it all, I think, has a lot to do with, you know, where the brand is now and how people see the brand. Because I don't think, you know, when we first launched it, there was sort of anyone else doing it. You know, not saying we had some, you know, genius idea. It just was the way we grew up and where we grew up and our point of view and how we put it together. But it's tough because it's like, how do you grow and evolve? People want you to sort of stay in the lane that you're in, that you launched in. You know, they want to see you grow and they want to see you evolve, but once you step out of the lane, they're like, whoa, 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 like, you're not supposed to do that.
I think within the genre that you guys work in, where we're seeing a lot of the kind of like, it's not really like celebrity designer, it's more like influencer designer, so things like Off-White with Virgil, what he's doing. I guess you could look at kind of the Bin Trill guys and kind of what they were making, but also like, even like Kanye and him doing his collection. And that must be strange for you guys because you come from, you know, you didn't come to it being these kind of influencers or celebrities, you kind of built up that. And is that strange to see? No,
I think it's pretty normal. It's just maybe more hip hop driven now, but like that's always been there, right? Like when we worked at Sean John with Puff Daddy, so he had a line, he was a celebrity with a line. I think it was always kind of there, just taking a louder voice maybe for this day and age, or stepping into like real fashion and doing fashion shows and doing, so I think it's always been there. It's just gone, it's just had a new voice. And one of my favorite women's brands is the Row, right? Like, Row puts out good product. Don't really see that in the same way as a Kanye West but it is, you know, it is the same kind of idea. I want to go back to the beginning with both of you guys and tell me, like, do you remember the point when you were a child or a teenager where fashion entered your consciousness? For me, it was like, I was about 19 when I even thought about fashion as like, of interest, of like a job or a career, where I was just working retail, and that led me into my interest into fashion. I always loved clothes, never thought of being a designer, never even crossed my mind. I had no friends that were designers, seemed like the furthest thing removed from what I could do. But then when you find out how accessible it kind of can be, and you kind of infiltrate that circle, then, you know, then it's something you kind of can achieve. So yeah, I started working at Sean John. That's how I kind of got started and met Dao Yi. I think going to school in the city, in New York, going to public school, which is part of the reason why we even, you know, named the brand public school, was that was the, you know, like the easiest way to sort of like separate yourself from everyone else. And that was like an important thing in high school, like not being like everyone else, or being the first, or being, you know, the only person to, you know, like to have this, to wear this, or to sort of put it together. So early on, I think in high school, those codes were like embedded, just from a style standpoint, was the thing that could separate you. You didn't have to be, you know, the most handsome or the coolest, or you just, you know, had to be unique, and you had to be authentic. So all those things weighed, you know, like really heavily. So those things still go on to inform what we do today. And then, you know, like what Max was saying was, it was like, at that point where you really learned about this idea of sort of like reappropriation, like taking labels or like styles that weren't necessarily meant for, you know, for a particular group of people, and then like making it your own, like taking it and making it into something totally different, which I think is what we try to do with our brand. So, so I think high school had the biggest effect on me, but it was for me, it was like via the music. It was like, but you know, like in high school, like
all I wanted to do was like dance. Like being a dancer, like in high school was like, no one wanted to be a photographer or, you know, a producer or a blog, you know, obviously not a blogger, but like the cool shit was the dance. And I think as a dancer, you had to also, like being in the club scene in New York City, like you also had to stand out like that way too. And then that was the time where sort of videos were really, you know, like music videos were like, yeah, everyone was taking their cues from sort of music videos. So the styling of it all, that I think had a big impression on me. That's when I first started to think about fashion, but using it as a way to like separate myself from everyone else.
Yeah, it's interesting for both of you. It feels like the interest in fashion came from like the interplay between clothing and identity. It wasn't so much about like fashion as kind of art or fashion as a concept or magazines or anything like that. It's very much to do with personal identity.
When we started this brand, we kind of always wanted to make it feel a bit emotional, that when somebody puts on a public school garment, that they feel something. How do we do it all the time? I don't know, but you know, we've gotten that response where people like, they feel something, and that's one of the best feelings ever. Like even when we start our season, it starts from an emotional place. It doesn't start from, let's you know, let's do Saint-Tropez in 1999 concept this season. It's really like, what are we feeling? What do we want to wear? What's our mood? What's going on in our lives? And that's really where it starts, the cues for our season. And then it kind of breaks out into something that's a little bit more tangible that we could take to, you know, to textile and to drape.
You know, those ideas of like being first and like being the only one or being the first to do something, like those codes, I think, were probably things that we picked up from hip hop, and the idea of reappropriation, of taking something that wasn't necessarily meant for you and combining it with something else to create something new. I think that that's more what we got from, you know, listening to the music than the actual style.
Right.
I also think there's this strange thing in hip hop where, and you maybe noticed this moment where it's like fashion kind of became fashionable and it became cool, and you see it even in the lyrics. People stop talking about wearing streetwear or sportswear and they start, you know, and they're not even kind of talking about wearing Gucci or anything like that anymore. They're talking about, you know, Margiela or Balenciaga, and that must have been an interesting transition for you guys. Was that before you'd started public school, or was that around the time?
Around the time.
After we left Sean John, like I went and opened a shop down in Miami, and this is like 2005, and it was like a concept shop that was sort of based on, you know, having traveled to Asia and to Europe, and sort of like combining, you know, brands like I mean, we carried Margiela and Comb and you know,
Visvim,
Watanabe, but combining it with Supreme and Stussy and Visvim and brands like that, because we didn't dress like that. We didn't dress like all one thing. It was always about sort of finding something new, and then not just taking it for what was presented or how it was presented, but, you know, mixing it and making it new. So the concept of the shop was very much, you know, the precursor to what we do, you know, at public school, was like, you know, like flipping things and you know, like taking references from, you know, European fashion houses and mixing it with streetwear. And so I think that was before, you know, people, you know, like hip hop got obsessed with, you know, like European labels.
Public school kind of started as an in-house label there. Hey? Why do you think it's worked? Did it work in the context of the store, or do you think that's part of the reason it's become so successful beyond the store, as it wasn't quite right for?
Well, I don't, you know, nothing worked in the store, so it was like Miami Beach in 2005, you know, where it was like Versace still had a shop like off of Collins, so it was like still very much like old Miami Beach, not old like, you know, like 90s Miami Beach, but this was like sort of the influx of, you know, I think Miami's always been pretty unique in that sense, you know, and the art scene that's now there, and Basel, of course, you know, that was always there, but I think people just saw it as this nightlife city and never gave credit to sort of all the cultural influences that existed there. But I mean, when we had the shop, you know, there was nothing down there like that was cool in that sense, from a sort of fashion mix. And so I mean, you know, public school didn't, you know, like it was almost like the shop, you know, it was like this museum. Like people would come in and like look at shit, and they wouldn't necessarily buy, because I don't think people got it. And I think people from out of town and people from New York who came were like, oh shit, like what is this doing here? So I think we're really early for the store, which is why the store doesn't exist now. But I think, you know, for us, you know, that it was like the breeding grounds to do public school.
When I've read kind of interviews with both of you and I was researching, you both talk about New York as being like so central to your design process and so central to who you guys are. But it's weird because in a way public school is not born out of New York in some ways, and there's kind of an irony to that in a way.
New York is really true to us, more so than it is true to the brand. Like, yeah, New York is the melting pot of the world, but we see it as such a global thing. New York is New York, but it's such a global city that New York is almost like a mini version of the world, right? So we can say it's every metropolitan city across the world. You can say New York is the same as like a London and Tokyo, a Hong Kong. And we have that, whenever we go to those cities, it feels like it's New York. It has the same energy. You still walk around. It's a street-based culture.
I interviewed Olivier Roosting for this series, and he kind of made a joke where he was like, you know, other than Kanye West, I'm the only black fashion designer. And I wondered if you guys feel, because of kind of like your like heritage and both of your different cultures, where you can legitimately actually bring something different to fashion, because fashion is so white, and I think having that kind of global attitude is so important. But a lot of people don't have it, definitely don't have it authentically.
Can we go back to what Olivier Roosting, what Olivier said?
I know, I thought that was going to offend you. I'm like, sorry. You should write to him.
He said, other than Kanye, he was the only black designer. And then Lou was like, what about Maxwell? And he was like,
that's exactly what I said. That's exactly what I said. I was like, what about
I was like, Maxwell, who, the singer? Of course we think about it. I mean, how could you not? I mean, I think it's pretty glaring. But in the same token, you know, like, you know, it's been a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it's, you know, like that, the question you asked us about in terms of peers, you know, it wasn't just, and you know, I don't think we're naive to the fact that it wasn't just what we were doing, but it was who we were doing what we were doing at that time, where it was like, oh shit, you know, like, you know, it was convenient, I think, the help and the praise, or what, you know, whatever was happening with us. Not that we were tokens, but, and so there's a reality in that. But then, you know, I think there's a responsibility, you know, like there, because you have another, you know, generation of designers who maybe never saw an opportunity there until they, you know, saw our story. And not to make it more than what it is, but you think about it every second, I think.
Yeah, for sure. You know, since some notoriety has come to public school, there's also an idea of like, you know, always being a student and a teacher. So like, we try to do as much as we can to like try to pass on a good word, or always take in help. Like we live off our mentors, and we love to mentor others. So for that to kind of come about, and you know, like, I don't even want to get into it, but the race thing has always been a huge elephant in the room sometimes, and yeah, there's the responsibilities from us, from what we do, from not being formally trained, from not coming in from a higher house, then to start our brand, to be where we are now, which is not anywhere, but we're here. It means a lot, and I think people just kind of relate to that story, or just can dream bigger with that story.
Would you say you're similar people?
Nope.
It's like couples therapy now. Why not?
You just never called. Like, it's gonna be late. And no. I mean, I think we, you know, first and foremost, we're you know, at different stages in our respective lives.
Do you feel like a different generation sometimes? You're like, yes.
Yeah, I mean, the older I get, I'm like,
you're like, no, it's
fucking kids, man. Jesus.
Right, like.
No, but you know, for me, I mean, you know, I have a family. You know, I got 2 kids and married, and
I'm the total opposite of having 2 kids and a wife. So yeah, we're not the same.
You know, I look at Max as my 3rd son sometimes.
You could have been. You might be old enough to have me. It's funny.
Got really passive aggressive here.
But yeah, I mean, you know, I think, you know, it's like, as the older of the 2, I feel like you know, a responsibility to, on one hand, you know, like feeling like he should, you know, be where I'm at, and knowing that, you know, that's not a reality. But on the other hand, you know, wanting to like pass on some of the things that, you know, I've learned and seen that he might have not have seen or learned.
Like what?
So, I mean, I'm surprised sometimes that he can, like, you know, like recall the same things that I reference, like, because he's 8 years younger than me, that like, it's, you know, I'm like, you really remember that, man? Like, but yeah, I mean, I think that that's what sort of like brought us together was that we experienced it in the same way and saw it the same way. So it's weird how that works. What
is good design? Because you talked about how emotion is quite important in what you do, and it's got to have these kind of like connections to something that is, you know, authentic or relevant to who you are and who you grew up with, and that's obviously something you want your shopper to feel. So I wonder what good design is. Is it just about the garment, or is it about the ethos of the garment, or is it about image and branding? Like, is it all of those things?
All of the above. For me, it's all the above.
Yeah, I think it's like good design is creating something that people never thought that they needed or wanted until they saw it. And then it was everything that they ever wanted. But doing that like consistently with the same point of view, like not jumping around and, you know, like being heritage one season and then goth another season, and then just because that's what's happening. I think it's like doing it over and over again with the same thing every season, but making it feel new again.
Like press-wise and like in all the accolades, that came at a really short time. So we still feel like we're a really small brand, right? Like that's.
Do you think you suffered from like too much hype?
I think so. I don't think we suffered from it. You know, who knows? I mean,
yeah.
But it, you know, it's not, you know, like it could certainly work against you. Right. You know, I think people like always want to root for the underdog, and if you win too much, it's like becomes a thing. But also, you know, like from a business standpoint, like people think we're a lot bigger than we are, and when they find out, you know, like we're not, and like books called, you know, like asking, you know, who's buying your media, and you're like, buying what? We don't have an advertising budget, or, you know, so I think, you know, the perception of public school is that it's bigger than it is, and I think that could work against us sometimes. So, you know, we're working hard to like make sure we like deliver on, you know, whatever hype there is out there.
But you're proud of what you're doing?
Yeah.
Damn right.